So this is the introduction to nature awareness and permaculture design. It's actually part of a year-long series in our school called Kalapa, and I'll explain more what that is in a few minutes. I'd like us to start by doing an exercise to get present. I do this with all my clients and in most of my classes. It's a very simple exercise. It's 3 breaths, and I'll walk us through it. So I invite you to get comfortable, and we'll take one big breath, and on the first exhale, we'll let go of everything from the past. Here we go. We'll take a second deep breath, and on this exhale, we'll let go of everything from the future. Here we go. And now we'll take a third deep breath. And on this exhale, we'll get really present in the here and now. And I invite you to come into your body as you do that. We'll make it an embodied presence. So here we go. Okay. So, I would love it if people here could put in the chat where you are watching from or tuning in from. We have people registered from every continent except Antarctica. We have people registered in Australia, people registered in Africa, people registered in Asia, all over Latin America, US and Canada. So, all right, where I am in Washington State in the United States. If you know your bioregion, all right, Jason from San Diego, cool. National borders are sometimes drawn as a straight line that somebody drew on a map. And yet, the bioregions are distinct in terms of the type of ecology that they have. And usually they follow the watersheds. So when all the water goes this way, that might be one bioregion. When all the water goes that way, that's a different bioregion, like if these were the mountains. And so if you don't know the name of your bioregion, you can probably find out. All right. And Paloma, where are you joining us from? If you could write that in the chat, that would be very cool. Helps us be all connected, and I find it very inspiring when we're in a course with people from all over the world. If you're willing to turn your camera on, that helps us all feel more connected, at least now at the beginning. I'll be doing a presentation pretty soon and don't really need to have cameras on at that point because we'll be just looking at the slides. But if you're willing, that would be cool. Paloma from Argentina. Awesome. Okay, well, I'm wondering, now people are starting to come in. Somebody I know from Germany is tuning in. Welcome, Maria.
Hi, Alan.
I've been asking people to put in the chat where they are tuning in from. If you could put in the chat where in the world you are.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. It says Martin is still connecting to audio, and I think he wants to hear from Guatemala. Wonderful. Excellent. And welcome, Martin. And the others, if you want to turn your camera on, that'll help us feel more connected. So let me go over some housekeeping, ground rules, guidelines. And I am looking for a volunteer someone who's planning to be here the whole time, or at least for the first hour, hour and a half. Hey, all right, it's good to see you. I'm looking for a volunteer who I would make co-host to help me let people in, like allow people in once I start the presentation, because once I start the presentation, I lose access to a lot of the Zoom functions. I don't know why. Hey, I know you. When it said Maria Jimenez, I didn't recognize the name because I know you by
Hi,
your
Alan.
middle name too. Good to see
Long
you.
time no see.
Long time no see. Wonderful to see you.
Mhm.
So I am looking for a volunteer who is willing to be co-host and allow people in, admit people when I get into the presentation. Is anyone here willing? I
Nice to
know is
meet you
fine.
too.
What's
I'm on
that?
my I'm on my phone. I have no idea if that would work. And at some point I'll be going home and maybe switch to my computer. I don't know if I can do that well. So I could offer for now, but I cannot be sure.
Yeah. And I can make more than one person co-host. This is simply to support me in allowing people in once the presentation starts, because if people start arriving, I lose access to the Zoom functions and I can't let people in unless I minimize the presentation, let them in, open it up again, and it tends to be a little disruptive that way. So welcome, welcome. And if you could write in the chat where you are tuning in from, that helps us all have a sense of that global connection. We have 95 people registered from every continent except Antarctica. I imagine most people are waiting or will be waiting for the recording. So let's talk about some of the guidelines, etc. I invite you to turn off distractions. I invite you to turn your phone off, to turn off your email, to turn off anything that would take you away from what we're doing. Wonderful, Germany. And of course, if you're parenting, if you're waiting for an emergency text, that's okay too. It's an invitation to turn off distractions. Your presence actually supports me, and I think you will get more out of it. Excellent. Upstate New York. Thank you, Melanie. I'm also inviting people to turn your cameras on if you're willing, because that helps us also feel more connected as a group, at least before I start the main part of the presentation. So it will be mostly a presentation. So I invite you to write down your questions because I plan to have question and answer at the end. However, if your question feels urgent to you, or there's something you didn't understand and it would get in the way of moving forward, I invite you to unmute your microphone and just jump in with your question. That's okay also. Either way is fine. Just as a reminder, once I open the PowerPoint presentation, I lose access to some of the Zoom functions, and that includes the chat. So I will not be monitoring the chat during the presentation. So where I am today is at my home. I wanted to be outside because of the topic, of course, nature awareness and permaculture design. This is one of my favorite trees where I live. And today we're having a heat wave. So at some point, I may move inside. The high today is supposed to be 95 Fahrenheit, which is 35 Celsius. It's not totally unbearable, but it will be quite warm. Also, if my internet drops, please stay on the call. It happens occasionally. It doesn't always happen. It's not fun when you're a presenter and that happens, but sometimes it happens. So I would need to reset my router, and so just hang tight, and I would get back on the call if my internet drops. The other thing is I don't typically structure breaks into these calls. I allow breaks to happen organically when we need them. So if you think we need a break, please feel free to speak up, and also feel free to take care of yourself. You can do what you need to do to take care of yourself. So the presentation that I'll be doing, some of the images are photos that I took. Others are images that I collected randomly on the internet over the years and didn't plan necessarily on using them. If one of these images belongs to you, please tell me. I'd like to give you credit or add a link, or I'm willing to remove the image. Or if you know whose image it is, I would like to give them credit or add a link, and I'm willing to remove the image. However, the presentation is free, right? And there are there are fair use rules with copyright for educational purposes. Nevertheless, I would like to give credit. So thank you again for being here. And I'd like to know if there are any questions that you have, if there's anything that you want to ask or say before we get into the presentation. Especially if you didn't ask or say it, it would interfere with you being present during the call.
So I take I'm not doing co-host now, yeah?
You are co-host, actually, Martin. Thank you very much for your willingness.
Okay.
And once I start the presentation, if you notice people coming in and you can click the admit button, that would be very helpful to me and especially to them, probably.
Okay, so I'm on my phone. I have never used Zoom on the phone like this before. I don't know if I will even see them. And also I'm on mobile data, and so please have a second one and don't rely on me.
Okay.
As long as I'm here and it works, I will do it. But yeah.
I really appreciate it, Martin. I appreciate your willingness to volunteer. Is there anyone else who's planning to be here for at least the first hour of the presentation who's willing to admit people as they show up, because I will lose my Zoom functions once I start the presentation? All right. Thank you. So let me make you co-host, Maria. I appreciate it so much. Okay. Yeah, it really contributes to my need for support and also being of service, because people coming in the class, and also teamwork. I like that too. Okay, let's get going on this piece. I'll share my screen with you. So, permaculture design with a brief intro to nature awareness. So, let me tell you, let's go on. I'll tell you just a little bit about me. I grew up bilingual, bicultural in Mexico City, Mexico. And when I was in my teenage years, I came across what I considered to be life purpose. And at that point, the way I articulated it was that I wanted to research, I'm going to stand up here. I wanted to research best practices. I wanted to research the most powerful tools, processes, and methodologies for living in harmony within ourselves, with each other, and with the planet. That started in 1987. So this search for best practices is what led me to things like nonviolent communication, different meditation techniques, permaculture design, and many, many other things. And this is what led to me creating Cascadia workshops, which is the previous version of my life's project. And the difference between Cascadia workshops and Kalapa is the same as the difference between a heap and a whole, W-H-O-L-E. An example of the difference between a heap and a whole is if you take a car engine and take it apart and all the parts are in a pile, that's a heap, un montón. It doesn't do anything. They're not connected in a way. Something that's a whole, when you put those parts together, then the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And so Kalapa is an integrated whole. So we went from a heap to a whole. Another metaphor I like is that we went from a caterpillar to a butterfly. I did a search starting in 1998 for my dream property, and that's a method I also teach separately. A method for visioning and manifesting something that's dear and important to you. And I found it in the year 2000, and I was able to buy it in 2002. So I've been in this place for about 20 years, practicing permaculture here. And years before that, in the mid 90s, 95, 96, is when I began studying nature awareness at Wilderness Awareness School under John Young. I was part of something called the Kamana program. And I live with somebody that I'll tell you about. He's in one of the slides, who teaches nature awareness and skills and runs a nature school for children here on our land. I think I'll pause. I'll keep going now. I'll pause there. So here's Kalapa in a very simplified version. You can see that in the center we have the arrows that represent north, south, east, west, and the corners. And each of this compass, in Spanish the word is brújula, gives us the organizing principle for our curriculum. And you can see that nature awareness and permaculture design are in the southwest. I'll show you a couple more versions of what we're doing with Kalapa. This is 2021. So just a moment, I'm trying to okay, this is 2021. You can see we started this year's cycle in February, where we did an overview of the Northeast, which mostly focuses on personal practice. Because it was the beginning of the cycle, we also did an overview of Kalapa. And in March, we covered nonviolent communication, did an introduction to that. And as you can see, we're in the Southwest, Friday, July 30th. So we have 3 more sessions for this year's cycle. In the West, we have community and working in groups, and that'll be Friday, September 24th. I invite you to save these dates now. You can put them in your calendar now. In the Northwest, we have grief work and ancestral healing, and that'll be Friday, October 29th. And then we'll be concluding this year's cycle, covering in-birth theory on Friday, December 3rd. All the sessions are happening on Zoom, same time as this session. Now we also have a longer cycle, and this is where we're spending an entire year in each direction. So 2020, we spent the year, we did a 9-month course in nonviolent communication, very powerful tool for preventing and resolving conflicts and creating high quality connections where people create mutually agreeable and mutually beneficial outcomes. This year, we're currently in the middle of a course called Lifestyle Design Lab, where we started out sharing different tools for lifestyle design and visioning and manifesting, and then divided everybody into small groups, and people are doing peer coaching and mentoring, so mastermind groups, helping each other manifest the thing they most want to create. Within 2 weeks, somebody found their dream home. It was really quite extraordinary. But people are working on all kinds of different things in that class. So we're doing group coaching and also this peer mentoring and coaching. Next year, 2022, we'll be spending the entire year doing the Social Entrepreneurs Roadmap. And so this is about how to create a high impact right livelihood, how to find what you do best, that you most enjoy, that most has the ability to contribute to the world, that can also be your economic engine. So this is one of our offerings in the South, and we're going to spend the entire year of 2022. So we have some free question and answer calls coming up about that program, and really looking forward to it. We'll also be doing the mastermind model, in other words, getting people into groups, supporting each other in building their dream business. One of the issues is that the corporate sector, the business sector in general, is unable, by and large, to contribute to people's needs for meaning and purpose. And many people are leaving the corporate sector and leaving jobs, wanting to start their own thing without knowing how to do it. So it took me 12 years to create that curriculum, because when I started, I didn't know what I was doing. And I studied with many people, and I'm hoping that it could save someone a lot of time. You can see in 2023, we're going to do an entire year in the topic that we're covering today. And then 2024 on building and sustaining community and working effectively in groups. And like that, this gives us an 8-year cycle for Kalapa. This is our long cycle that we're in right now. Let's talk about why nature awareness and permaculture. The sun is going to be following me, and it's already getting warm outside, so I might move pretty soon. Why nature awareness and permaculture? The scientific community has known for decades that we are impacting Earth's life support systems in negative ways, all driven by human activity. We have not only, humans have not only differentiated ourselves from the natural world, but we are rapidly dissociating ourselves from the natural world. We're in the largest extinction period since the dinosaurs, all driven by human activity. I was reading about climate change in the mid-1980s, and that's part of what got me into this work. We've known these things for so long, and yet we persist. And yet everybody on this call, was born into systems and structures that we inherited from well-intentioned elders, because 200 years ago, the earth did seem infinite in terms of its resources. 200 years ago, the earth did seem infinite in terms of its ability to absorb pollution. But now we see that that's not the case. And so not only are we participants, whether willingly or unwillingly, we're participants in a system that is destroying indigenous cultures and is destroying ecosystems all over the planet. And we are on a collective collision course with nature. Humans cannot win that. Civilization exists by geologic consent. So part of the promise of nature awareness and permaculture is to start to develop a first name basis relationship with the natural world. Many of us, when we go into a forest, what we see is a wall of green. We can't differentiate between a fir tree and a cedar tree and an alder tree. We're not connected with the cycles of nature in a way that can help us become native to our own place. Everybody here has ancestors who were indigenous to somewhere. So I'd like to take a moment and call in our ancestors. Invite them in. And just imagine all the hardships that they went through so that we could be here now on this call. I love reminding myself and others that you are the product of the love of thousands And yet, we are dangerously disconnecting from the natural world. Only when the last tree has been cut down and the last fish been caught and the last stream poisoned will we realize we cannot eat money. Cree proverb. This is an image that during the fires in the Amazon in 2019. And now in my region of the world, not right where I live, but the Pacific Northwest of the United States and the entire West Coast is going through very, very intense wildfires. Let's talk first about nature awareness and skills, because for me, this is an essential foundation for permaculture. One thing that happens with permaculture design is that people learn the principles and people start to apply them, and then they start cutting things down. They start taking things out without knowing what they are. And they haven't learned the natural cycles of the place where they live. So before you start taking things out and changing things, it's helpful to know what is there and to be connected with what is there at the outset. Most of us have become aliens to our place. So this is going to be a very, very brief introduction to nature awareness. But I want to acknowledge the lineage that I learned this from. Tom Brown Jr. was apprenticed by an Apache Indian scout starting at the age of 8. He's probably in his 80s now, Tom Brown, and he was 8 years old. And his teacher, Stalking Wolf, was already approaching elderhood when he started mentoring Tom. And Stalking Wolf had grown up in the old ways. And so he taught Tom everything about the natural world, the hard skills and the soft skills. The soft skills could be plant ID, reading the weather, even bird language. I don't know if you know that when you're in the forest, the birds can tell you if there's a predator nearby. I'll give you an example. When you hear the birds and they're going, like, that means all is well. That's called baseline. If suddenly the birds go quiet, you know something's happening. Or if you know the birds' alarm calls, they'll tell you that something is going on. So when I'm walking in the woods, I'm listening for the birds because they'll alert you to things that are happening. So that's an example of the soft skills. The hard skills being the survival skills. Fire by friction. What do you do if you're lost in the forest? How do you get through that? How do you build an emergency shelter where you are if you need it? Tom Brown's first student, who then became the first teacher under him at the tracker school, is John Young. And that is the person who taught me the 8 shields model, which gives us the organizational principle for Kalapa. And John gave me permission to teach the 8 shields model in 2005. And it's one of the classes I teach. And he was also my teacher in this nature awareness. And the man on the bottom right, Cody Beebe, is my brother from another mother. I've lived with him on this property for 20 years. He runs a nature school for children, and he was mentored by John. So living on the land with Cody, I remember times working outside, and he would spontaneously stop and say, "Okay, Alan, tell me all the deciduous trees that live in our area." And I would start to have, okay, there's this one and this one and this one. Or then he'd say, "Oh, what was that bird call? What kind of bird is that? Are they here year round or do they migrate?" And he just quizzed me. So I learned so much living with this man, and getting to be in this place and learning the cycles of the land. And so this is part of the lineage of this first piece that I consider an important foundation to permaculture design. So this is a bioregional quiz. I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. I'll let you read this on your own. It's similar to something Cody does in some of his workshops. He calls it a backyard journey. It takes you on a journey in your backyard to identify things right where you are. What plant is that? What bird was that? And start to get to know the natural world. A 12-year-old who grew up in an indigenous culture can identify about 200 plants and their uses, what part to harvest, when to harvest it. A 12-year-old in my culture can identify about 200 corporate logos. So this backyard journey that Cody does, John Young used to do something similar, and he called it the alien test. Why did he call it that? Because he wanted to demonstrate that most of us have become aliens to our place. We're not native to our place. We've become aliens. And so the purpose of the alien test was to fail miserably, because it was 333 questions and almost nobody got them all right. So, and you would do the alien test at the beginning of the Kamana program and then at the end of the Kamana program, and then you could really see your progress. So this is 21 questions of this bioregional quiz. It's adapted from this book called Home, a Bioregional Reader. And I'm going to go through these slides fairly quickly. I'm not expecting answers. We have people from Argentina, from Venezuela, from Washington State, from Guatemala, from Germany, and 95 people registered, like I said, from every continent except Antarctica. So here comes the first question. Trace the water you drink from precipitation to tap. How many people can do that? The tap is the la llave. In Mexico, they call it the faucet. How many days until the moon is full? I remember the last full moon, but I had to think about, when is the next one? How many days until that? Describe the soil type around your house and neighborhood. Again, remember, part of the purpose of this is we're all gonna fail. It's an awareness checker of how far we are from really knowing our local ecology. 4, what is the average rainfall where you live? What is the name of your watershed? Where are the headwaters? What were the primary subsistence techniques of the cultures that lived in your area before you? Name 5 edible plants that grow in your area and the season of their availability. Oh gosh, Zoom is doing some weird things with my computer here. What direction do winter storms? What direction do the winter storms usually come from in your region? Actually, where I live, we have 2 different directions, depending on the type of storm. Where does your garbage go? Do you know where your garbage goes? Most of us don't. Where does your sewage go? How long is your growing season? What is the average last frost date and the average first frost date? Name 5 native trees in your area? Name 5 resident and migratory birds in your area. We've lost touch with nature. It's really tragic. What primary geological processes or events influenced the landforms where you live? What animal or plant species are endangered in your area? Extinct? From where you are reading this, point to the north. Name one of the first spring wildflowers to bloom in your area. We have 4 more questions. Remember, the purpose is to realize, oh, nice, Martin, thank you for showing those. Many of us are so disconnected, and this is just giving us that awareness. When does the sun set on winter and summer solstices where you live? I would also add where, because I have a mountain right here, and I know the points, because I watch it. I know where the sun rises also on each of the solstices. What kinds of rocks and minerals are found in your home zone? Could you see the stars last night? Not through my ceiling. What are the greatest threats to the integrity of the ecosystem of your bioregion? Okay, so that's the bioregional quiz, the backyard journey, the alien test, one version. One of the things that is a connecting thread between nature awareness and permaculture is pattern recognition. This is a photo I took in the year 2000 in Sedona, Arizona. I really liked the sun on that rock and the tree. And this tree branching pattern is a universal pattern. We see it in river systems. We see it the way our lungs are formed, the way our circulatory system is formed. We have many, many universal patterns in the tree. The sap flows from roots to crown in a spiral, and it flows from crown to roots in an opposite spiral. You have a double helix inside the tree. If you take the branches of the tree, I don't have a slide for this, unfortunately, and the roots of the tree, the space in the middle is a torus. It's like a donut. You have so many patterns embedded in the tree. Let's talk about permaculture design. This is my definition. It's an ecological design system for working with rather than against nature, in which you maximize the functional relationships between elements in order to minimize the need for human labor. In other words, by working with nature, nature does a lot of the work. It can be very simple or it can be very sophisticated. Both are great. Whatever works where you are. My mother was doing a version of permaculture in a 16-story apartment in Mexico City, Mexico. She was composting and she was growing food in pots. So, and there is such a thing as urban permaculture. You can look it up. There's a lot of this happening in the world. This is a growing movement. Pattern recognition. The golden mean, increasing levels of complexity. The right-hand image from top to bottom. Increasing levels of complexity. Patterns that we see in the universe repeat, they show up everywhere. And again, these two men coined the term permaculture. Originally, it was a contraction of the word permanent and agriculture, and it became permaculture. Bill was a forest ecologist, and David was more the systems thinker, designer. And Bill was also very charismatic and spread permaculture throughout the world. And David did a lot of the hands-on in the ground. I mean, both of them were doing both things. But these are the two people to whom we owe a big debt of gratitude, and all their students and their students and their students. It turns into thousands of people. So I studied with the Bullock brothers. I did my permaculture design course in 1999 with people who studied with Bill Mollis and David Holmgren. Our course was exceptional in the sense that it was 4 weeks long, on site and hands-on. And we had a lot of guest teachers. I remember one session, different guest teachers were asked to introduce their favorite plant. So we had one particular teacher whose favorite plant was bamboo, and we had 3 days just on bamboo. Universal patterns. So nature awareness, a lot of what you see is based on patterns and pattern recognition. And the same with permaculture. So I want you to, for a moment, close your eyes and imagine an image of nature. Okay, now open your eyes and raise your hand if your image of nature included humans. Because that's where we are, is for most of us, nature, our idea of nature this is my neighborhood. This is the site of the future eco-village. I'll define eco-village as a human-scaled settlement where everybody's social and economic needs can be met within walking or bicycling distance. There are many definitions for eco-villages. That's the one I like. And this was taken from a drone. A friend of mine brought his drone and took this photo. And we have about 14 different households on my road. And in the next year and a half, I anticipate 7 properties might change hands. So if you know somebody who can help us financially to finance some of the properties to help the eco-village happen, or if you know somebody who would be excited to be part of it, whether or not the financial part is a piece of it, or somebody who would be excited to help us make it happen, please send them my way. I mentioned earlier, a lot of this presentation are photos I found randomly over the years on the internet. If this is your image, I want to give you credit. If you know whose it is, I want to give them credit or add a link. And I'm willing to remove these images. I'm just in love with planet Earth. There's nowhere like it. We're all in this together. Oh, there's a little bird down there. I'll leave it alone. Okay, let's talk about some principles. Different permaculture books actually, and they even have different numbers of principles. So remember, this is an introduction. And if you get excited about it, I invite you to do your own research, your own learning. Eventually, maybe sign up for a permaculture design course. In this presentation, I have 11 principles. Relative location. So you're placing elements in your design so that you can maximize the functional connections, conserve energy through relative location, and also minimize your own energy output. An example is one thing I see in the United States a lot is some people like to garden and they like to grow vegetables, but they put their vegetable garden 100 meters away from their house or somewhere really far. And that requires a lot of walking and more energy to go water things. It's just fairly inefficient compared to, and maybe later I can walk over, growing food right outside your door. I can weed some things on the way in or on the way out. I can pick some leaves of things on the way in. It's right there. It makes it easy. It's more energy efficient as far as my energy. This is a suburban permaculture plot. I believe this is in Australia. Number 2, each element performs 2 or more functions. Place your elements in such a way that each performs multiple functions. That's actually at my house. It's actually right over there. There's a play structure I built, and this this vine growing on the play structure is a kiwi plant. And my idea was I wanted the children to be able to play on the play structure and also be able to, eat some yummy fruits while they're playing on the play structure. So each element can perform 2 or more functions. So that is a play structure, and it's also a trellis for a plant. A gourd tunnel or a squash tunnel. Calabazas. some garden bed, dining table with your salad right there. And why not? If you need a wall, why not add beauty as one of the functions? With mechanization, industrialization, the desire for efficiency, we've lost a sense of craftsmanship. People really making things by hand with high quality, taking the time to make it amazing. IKEA plays a role in the world. And we've really lost the sense of locally produced craftsmanship. Principle number 3, each important function is supported by 2 or more elements. So by functions, basic needs like water, food, energy, fire protection, they can all be served in 2 or more ways. I'll give you an example of combining these 2 principles. If I live on a property where I know I need a windbreak because it's quite windy from a certain direction, but I also know that I need a tool shed. Maybe I put my tool shed in the place where I also want to block the wind. Now this element is performing multiple functions. That would be another example. But then the functions, and then I can also grow food up it, and now it's performing the third function. Things like that if I use it as a trellis, or maybe I put a little deck on top of the tool shed for a little play space for the children. One element performing multiple functions, and also each function, so the kids have multiple places to play. We have multiple places where we're growing food. Places like California with the wildfires, there are different ways people can create fire breaks to protect their home from wildfires. People enjoying each other. Beautiful images of nature are interspersed throughout this presentation. A rainbow. I aspire to every day eat a rainbow. Principle number 4, efficient energy planning. So this includes zone and sector analysis, which we'll talk about in a second, accounting for slopes, and also efficiency in terms of creating the least change for the greatest possible effect, avoiding type 1 errors, maximizing solar gain and minimizing heat loss in structures, especially in cold climates, and what people call appropriate technology. Let me explain what type 1 errors are. A type 1 error is an error that once it's committed, it's hard or impossible to undo it. An example would be building your house in a floodplain. Very hard to fix that once you did it. That would be a type 1 error. This image on the right, by the way, is from the cover of a book called Introduction to Permaculture, written by Bill Mollison and Rennie Mia Slay. Accounting for slopes. I live on a hillside. I can go downhill much faster and easier than uphill. So depending on where my home is and the areas where I walk every day, that's called zone 1 in terms of zone analysis. So how do I place things so that it's efficient in terms of my energy? This is a photo of a friend's herb spiral in Oregon. This is an example of some of these permaculture principles, because what this is it's mounded, and the herbs, the culinary herbs, are planted in a spiral. And what this means is, like, if I laid this out in a straight line, it would be 30 feet or 10 meters in one straight line. I would need a lot more sprinklers, let's say, to water that if it's 30 meters. I'm sorry, 10 meters or 30 feet long. But if I can put that 10 meters or 30 feet in a spiral, I can water a lot more efficiently. I can put the things that like wetter soil toward the bottom. I can put the things that like more drainage toward the top. And depending on my site and the plants and the spiral itself, I can have things that want more solar exposure toward the sunward side. In the northern hemisphere, that's the south. In the southern hemisphere, that would be north. And I can put the things that like more shade on the shady side. So again, a lot of things accomplished in a very simple universal pattern. Zone analysis refers to access by proximity is one way to talk about it. But the things that need most care, or the things that you harvest most often, you put in your zone 1. Now, this image with concentric circles is only conceptual. Most places don't end up looking like this, but you get the idea. Zone 2 are places you visit frequently, but it might not be where you naturally walk every day. Most people do not have a zone 5, meaning that that's unmanaged natural area, or even a zone 4, where you might put a nut orchard that you only visit once a year, for example, to harvest the nuts. So you can place things according to how much care they need or how often you want to visit them. Like planting salad greens next to my front door would be an example. Here's another example. Now, some people call zone 00 your interior, your intrapersonal space. And so now people talk about social permaculture and also like the interior aspects of permaculture. But this is another example of zonation. Now, in terms of your space, in terms of my space, there's the theory of you design it and then you live according to the design. But the other thing is, once you've lived in a place where you actually walk every day, where you actually go every day, then call that your zone 1. See how you're living, and then your design emerges from what makes most sense, instead of just imposing a theoretical map onto reality. Here would be an example that's not concentric circles, right? Actually, it still kind of is a concentric circles, but you get the point of zones. Now, sectors are energies that are coming from outside and moving through the system, generally speaking. So this would be, for example, winds. So my prevailing wind sector is over here. My destructive winter storm sector is that way. Now, there could also be a view sector. So if I strategically take out a couple of trees that way, I would have a view of the water at a distance. I don't plan to anytime soon, but I could open up a view sector over there. There could be a sound sector. There could be a fire sector in some places, California, for example, where they've been experiencing horrible wildfires lately, as well as so many places in the world, right? There could be a fire sector. This is where wildfires generally come from. So this is where we'll put our fire break. We'll put a big, we'll put a pasture with ducks and geese that keep the grass low. And then we might put a pond over there, and that could become our fire break. We have 2 elements now, the pond and the grassy pasture, as 2 elements performing that function of fire break from that fire sector. As an example, I'm just giving you kind of random examples here, but you get the idea. There could be a sound sector, like I said, where you want to block out sound with dampen the noise. And in a place like mine that's so heavily wooded, we have to be very mindful of our sun sector. In my winter sun, the sun is a lot lower, and so winter sun sector, and then the summer sun sector is different, but that's the general sun sector. So being aware of these things, when you start to bring in zone analysis and sector analysis, and then every function being supported by multiple elements and every element performing multiple functions, you start to see how it can get fairly sophisticated. And if you started with nature awareness, you know where the prevailing winds come from. You know where the frost pockets are. You know the first place that the snow melts and the last place that the snow melts. So this can help you, knowing the natural world, that the nature awareness contributes to this zone and sector analysis. Here's another example with zones and sectors. It even includes a wildlife corridor, which I love. A view sector, where area. So just more examples, more ideas for how to think about it, which you get to apply in your place. This is a place where I lived in college, although this was years later when I was visiting. And you can't see the windmill. It's on the other side of this building. We had a windmill that was pumping our water into a tank, and then via gravity it would come down into the kitchen. And the colorful small structure in the back on the left is an outhouse. And anyway, this was just a group of young people trying to figure out as best they could. Principle number 5, everything gardens, also known as using biological resources. Now, everything gardens also refers to the fact that when I asked everybody to think of an image of nature, and most people's images did not include humans, we need to understand that bees change their environment. Deer change their environment. Humans, by nature, change their environment, but the difference with humans is the rate and the scale, and especially technologically assisted, right? When a shovel is 3 stories tall and has scoops as big as a building, that's not quite a shovel anymore. So you can use plants and animals wherever possible instead of fossil fuels, both to save energy and contribute work to the system. Fuel, fertilizer, tillage, insect control, weed control, nutrient recycling, habitat enhancement, soil aeration, fire and erosion control. Anybody know the answer to this one? What is the lazy permaculturist's way of planting a berry hedge? If you know the answer, you can unmute and say it. The lazy permaculturist's way of planting a berry hedge.
Letting the birds do it.
Yeah, so what would you do to let the birds, how do you plant the hedge?
Ripe and let them eat it all.
Yeah, but so the technique is you hang a wire. That's all you do. You hang a wire from here to here. And then the birds will come sit on the wire, and they'll deposit the seeds in their little fertilizer packets. So that's the lazy permaculturist way of planting a berry hedge, is you just hang a wire. That would be an example, right, of using biological resources. I have some invasive plants behind my house that were planted by 2 owners ago. And I want to bring in some goats to help me take out those plants, because we've been battling them for years and years, and it's a lot of work, but the goats will love it. And anyway, still working on that. But yeah, it can get very creative. I'll just tell you up front that the 2 main limitations in permaculture, from the perspective of a permaculture practitioner, the 2 main limitations are your knowledge and your imagination, your creativity. This is where I did my permaculture course. This is at the Bullock Brothers farm. And that little structure you see there is called a chicken tractor. It's a movable enclosure where chickens just doing what they do. They'll scratch up all the plants. They'll sort of till the soil about 1/2 inch to 1 inch deep and fertilize it. And then you can move them. You move the enclosure to the next area where you might want to plant, for example. So it's called a chicken tractor. That's another example of using biological resources. To the left of the chicken tractor, there's a tree there that's in a different slide that I'll show you in a bit. Somebody's hobbit home. This might be at Sunray Kelly's property, but I'm not sure. I just love that natural cob construction. It can be labor intensive if you've ever done it, which is why people who really know what they're doing with cob, they actually have 3 teams: people who are mixing the cob, people who are doing the cobbing, and the third is a rhythm section. You get people on drums. So that the people mixing the cob with their feet get to dance. Cob is a mixture of mud, clay, often manure, which becomes sticky, and also straw, because the straw provides more strength as the cob dries. It has all these fibers going through it. And the way that we learned it is you put a big handful of straw under your armpits while you're dancing on top and mixing the cob with your feet. And so the straw starts to fall out and gets all mixed in. And meanwhile, there's the rhythm section. And then when the cobbers get tired, everybody switches. So the people who were cobbing get on the drums, and the drummers start dancing on the mixture. And then you start to build the structure. Okay, I took this photo. I was in, I think this was Oakland, California. And I looked at this and I was like, oh my gosh, I have to take a photo of this for my permaculture slideshow. Somebody thought that this would reduce their maintenance, I guess. I don't know what they were thinking. They just cemented all around these 2 trees. So the trees don't have room for growth. The soil has no aeration, no opportunities for water to filter through. And then on the lower right, they have this pipe. And I was trying to figure out, why do they have a bag attached to the pipe? And somebody thought, oh, maybe it's so that they don't trip on it, so that they see it and they don't trip. It's like, oh, okay, safety, but make it ugly while you're at it. I don't know. So this would be an example of what not to do. And then I walked like 2 houses down and saw this. Some trees growing out of basically a little field of flowers. This is an urban lot. So just to compare and contrast, this was 2 houses down from this. And somebody thought this was the way to go. But in terms of nature, yeah, in the end, all this concrete will probably get taken over. This is in a friend's yard in Seattle, Washington. And these are fruit trees. Again, this is an urban lot. Fortunately, it had this much space, which is more common in the Seattle area. But a lot of these are culinary herbs for the kitchen, and some edible plants, and also plants that attract pollinators and things like that. This was my very first garden. We did a sheet mulch, and what that was, we took all this compost and just put it right on the grass, and then we covered that with newspaper, and then we put more fertilizer, just like animal manure, and then we covered it with cardboard, and all that will kill the weeds and the grass. And then we already had our starts. We had little plants already started. And so then you just go in and you punch a hole through the cardboard all the way into the soil, and you can take your plant and you just put it in the hole. The more chances of weeds will come in. So just small enough to plant the plant, And then we mulched it over with straw. You can see some of the straw. And then you can see like in the bottom center, like a little group of rocks. So these were stepping stones. These were places for us to step into this garden. And we had all kinds of things in here. You can see a trail on the left-hand side. There's like a little pathway bordered by rocks. And that was actually because that was outside our front door. And whenever we opened the door, the dog would go running out. So we created like a landing strip for the dog because we didn't want him trampling the plants. So we made enough space there, created a little path to accommodate our friend who has passed away many years ago. This was my first garden. This was I think 1999, possibly. Principle number 6, energy cycle. So you're increasing the number of times that energy and resources cycle within a system between when they enter the system and when they leave the system. So you notice it just goes straight from source to sink, just in and out. In state B, they've done some terraforming, created some ponds and some places so that the water has a place to be stored or to rest or to be utilized before it goes back out. By the way, this is a good metaphor for money in your life. Bill Mollison, who coined the term permaculture, said that money is to social systems what water is to the landscape. It contributes to the sharing, the transportation, the dissemination of information, of nutrients. But the goal is not more, because then you end up with a flood, or a flood is unnatural. So the purpose is, how do you maximize the use of this energy between when it enters the system and when it leaves the system? So I like this as a metaphor as well for money in personal finances and in a business. Now, I'm considering pausing here for everyone to have a short break, bio break, stretch break, whatever you need. We are about an hour and 15 minutes into. If you're talking to me, Don, I think you're muted.
Your question showed me I need to do way more homework.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that it's humbling to me that reading those questions.
Right? I thought I knew some stuff, and then I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know anything.
You know, and part of becoming native to our place is also not buying into the story that we need to go it alone.
Right?
So it's really fun in community and with other people, learning the natural world, or yeah, even doing projects outside together.
It's a good idea.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, it's fun. It's fun to do stuff outside with other people. Okay. Welcome back. If you are back, can you see me and hear me okay, Don? Okay, great. So I'll let you spend 30 seconds or a minute with this image. I honestly forget which permaculture book this is from. I just had the image on my computer, and I have about 50 permaculture books on my bookshelf, so I'm not sure which book, but it could be one of the forest gardening books. You'll see in the upper left, the top of the left-hand circle, it says guild. In permaculture, a guild is similar to companion planting, except a guild can be more than two, right? It can be a whole functional grouping of plants that support each other. A typical one in the American Southwest, known as the Three Sisters, corn, beans, and squash. The corn would provide a trellis for the beans, and the squash would provide shade on the ground to prevent a lot of evaporation of the water, and all three of them providing food. The beans are also nitrogen fixing for the corn and the squash. So in permaculture, when we talk about guilds, we're talking about functional relationships of species that help each other. Earlier, I was talking about our economic systems and structures and how they need to be reformatted, retooled, reimagined, recreated. There's an interesting organization you can look up on your own. The acronym is CASSE, and I think it stands for the Center for the Advancement of a Steady State Economy. And they talk about, they've been around for years, talking about how do you create this kind of circular economy or a steady state economy rather than a growth for the sake of growth economy, which is the basis of why we're destroying ecosystems and indigenous cultures around the world. But I'll add to that. One of my teachers, Marshall Rosenberg, the founder of Nonviolent Communication, used to say that we need to ask some key questions. And one of them is, who are we? Are we just consumers? Are we just citizens with the right to refuse to vote and the right to remain silent? Actually, not in all countries. I'm talking about the United States. Who are we? Are you an aperture through which the universe is aware of itself? Who are we as human beings? That's one question. The other question is, what is the good life? Because this story we've been sold of more and consumption and trying to fill existential and psychological needs through buying more stuff is what is destroying ecological systems. All the extraction, the manufacturing, the transportation, it creates pollution every step of the way. And what we have is a linear economy. So the faster you can go from take to waste, the more you're supporting the GDP. 200 years ago, maybe it made sense. Today, it is insanity. This is a sawdust toilet on my land. Bucket box, and you can see the sawdust in the bucket. There is a scooper, and that box under the toilet seat is a 5-gallon bucket, and there's a centralized area where everything gets composted. We're doing a very specific method by Joe. It's Joe Jenkins is the author of a book called The Humanure Handbook. So we did his method here for, gosh, maybe a decade and a half. And right now we're in between, we're moving our composting area, and but still we still have a couple of these, and we're building more, and we're gonna start doing this humanure system again. But the humanure is a contraction of the words human and manure. So the Humanure Handbook by Joe Jenkins, and he's got quite a bit online these days too. So we followed his method for a long time, and recycling our nutrients back to the land. So this is thermophilic composting. This is creating the conditions for thermogenic bacteria to do their things. These are bacteria that generate high heat. And Joe Jenkins has a whole chapter on parasites and pathogens, and the things that deal with parasites and pathogens are time and heat. So the hot stage is actually the second of 4 stages, and the last stage is the whole pile cures for an additional year. And then if you're still worried about using it, say in your vegetable garden, you can just feed trees and shrubs with it. Most of us are exporting our fertility away from where we live, and we can be recycling so much more right where we live. That's actually the composting site years ago. I don't even recognize that car. That's how long ago it was. I think that was somebody who used to live here a long time ago. Principle number 7, small scale intensive systems. There's another version of the herb spiral. On your successes. So I love using hand tools, and especially for some reason, the Japanese have created really wonderful hand tools for gardening. Plant stacking is, for example, like the herb spiral. You have things in the same space, or for example, that image that we had during the break where you have trees and underneath them shrubs, ground covers, herbaceous plants, roots, vines, all in the same space. You can see on this herb spiral on the very left-hand side of it, I just recognized some strawberry plants, for example. All kinds of things in here that look yummy. Small scale intensive systems. This is an area where we took out some invasives and started planting part of our food forest. A food forest or an edible forest garden is a garden that mimics the structures and the functions of a forest ecosystem. This is the same from the other side. You can see the little bathroom with the composting toilet and then the hand washing station. It's connected to a hose, so you can actually put the hand washing station anywhere you want as long as the hose reaches. So a food forest is a garden that mimics the structures and functions of a forest ecosystem. So you can have, like, your canopy could be fruit and nut trees, and then edible and medicinal shrubs. Again, your herbaceous plants like culinary herbs, ground covers like, for example, strawberries, root crops. A perennial root crop where I live is the Jerusalem artichoke, for example, vines. And then you start getting into the ecological functions, right? Which plants fix nitrogen? Which plants attract beneficial insects? And it starts to get complex, but it works like this. If you take an old growth forest and you mow it down and you wait 500 years, in 500 years, you'll have an old growth forest again. And when you cut it and it starts to regrow, a lot of its energy is into fast growth until it gets to a certain point, and then that energy starts to become more like self-maintaining. Rather than growing more biomass in terms of volume, it densifies and it starts to self-maintain. And so what you're doing in a forest garden is you're doing something similar. You're creating a climax system. You're trying to create a system that could also be somewhat self-maintaining, although in permaculture systems do include humans. And that's how we re-embed humans into the landscape. But this edible forest garden can provide food, fuel, medicine, beauty, fun, habitat, so many things. Same spot from a different angle. This is the tree that I was pointing out was to the left of the chicken tractor in an earlier slide. This is a cherry tree, and this plant that's growing around it is called comfrey. And I learned this trick from the Bullock brothers, is to plant comfrey around my fruit trees. Not too close, because in my area there's a lot of moisture in the winter, and so that can promote like fungal diseases for the trees, but also far enough because it turns out that grass competes for water with the feeder roots of trees. So it's better for fruit trees to have an herbaceous ground cover around them. And comfrey is one of the plants that's a dynamic accumulator, so it draws nutrients from the soil into the leaves, and we use it as a mulch plant. So we just slash and mulch around the fruit tree, and it doesn't kill the comfrey. It just keeps resprouting. In fact, slashing it probably promotes more root growth. Now, comfrey, some people have trouble with it because they think it's invasive, but it's actually not invasive. What happens is it gets very established, so it is hard to get rid of. And the other thing is that it propagates through root growth or through root division. So I knew some people who had a field with comfrey and they wanted to get rid of it. And the way they tried to get rid of it was through plowing the field. And so they chopped up all the roots and they multiplied the issue that they had. So their technique totally backfired. So there are other ways to get rid of comfrey. So it doesn't spread, it doesn't take over, but it will get very established. And we use it as a mulch plant, slash and mulch for around some of our fruit trees. Same tree, cherry tree, but there's a vine growing up it, and that's a kiwi vine. Some people think of kiwi as a tropical fruit. It's actually temperate. If you think of New Zealand, has a similar climate to where I am. I'm noticing there's some cherries on this cherry tree. So again, the cherry tree is not just a cherry tree, it's also a trellis for the vine, for the kiwi. So every element performing multiple functions. This slide is a little tricky to see, but there's a yosta berry, a pawpaw, and a ginger plant. And the pawpaw is a native tree in North America that produces a fruit similar to the apple. And the yosta berry is actually protecting the pawpaw, but eventually the pawpaw will grow bigger and shade it out. And meanwhile, in the foreground, there's a ginger plant, some type of ginger that the Bullock brothers were growing on their farm. This is a photo I took at the Bullock brothers farm during my permaculture design course. Principle number 8, accelerating succession and evolution. Direct and accelerate the buildup of climax species in a shorter time. Some examples of ways to do this: by using what's already growing, introducing plants that will easily survive, adding organic materials, and substituting your own pioneer and climax species. So again, if you're creating a long-term garden system going to become self-maintaining, you can actually accelerate the rate of ecological succession. What that means is, if I take down a forest, there's the first generation of trees that come in and they prep the soil for the longer term trees that are coming in later. So in my area, that would be alders, for example. The alders are nitrogen fixing. They come in and they move in where the soil has been disturbed. But then in the long run, you might find trees like cedar or big leaf maple, which is big leaf maple is an undervalued climax species here, but actually there's quite a bit of it on my land. And so you can help things move along a little faster if you know what's happening. Now, this slide and the ones coming up are from Cody's nature school, actually, and where they did some ecological restoration down by the creek. Now, this is an invasive plant called Himalayan blackberry. If you live in the Northwest, you've probably grappled with this plant. There it is, a little trampled. I think it might have snowed not long before this, and you can see the creek in the background. So by hand, we took all this blackberry out, slashed it out, dealt with the roots. And there's Cody with some of his students putting some plants in the ground, helping to restore the creek. And this is what it looked like within, 2 different sessions of theirs. Right now, that blackberry patch we have is full of raspberries. If I were to take you down there and take a picture of it today, we have a big patch of wild raspberries. Well, wild in the sense that we've let them just grow wild. But yeah, you can take an area that's been taken over by something that looks like this, and eventually, really beautify the area. Principle number 9, diversity. Diversity involves polycultures versus monoculture. Monoculture is the same plant, the same species in rows, and that's all there is. So conventional agriculture is based on monocultures, and you're moving, as I was referring earlier, toward a self-stabilizing system. So mostly you're using perennial plant guilds. For those of you unfamiliar with the terms, annual plants are plants you have to plant every year, versus perennial plants. They could be self-seeding annuals, or they're plants that just keep growing year after year. It's not the number of elements necessarily, but the number of functional connections between the elements that really make the system robust and resilient. This is the zone on my land we call the food forest when it was very young, just planted. And on the left, there's a dwarf cherry tree that has since died. And that's part of permaculture, right? Try things out. The Bullock brothers encouraged us to do this. There's a plant you like, try it in different places, see where it does well. We had a whole session during my permaculture design course made, and we had a panel of permaculture teachers, and they all went through like their biggest mistakes and learned so much. And the Bullock brothers themselves said, you know, we have killed thousands of plants, not intentionally, but as you are learning what works, some things make it and some things don't, but you're learning and you're creating a more resilient system. This is during that permaculture design course, and these things on the trays are seed balls. So dirt, clay, maybe a little manure, with seeds for replanting. So these can be scattered in the landscape to wait for the rains to come. So sometimes people do this with tree seeds in a place that's been clear cut. And once you have, and so they're sitting on trays, they're drying a little bit. But once you have these, you can just take these seed balls and just kind of disperse them where you want those seeds to eventually germinate. Another technique. Principle number 10, edge effects. This is on my property. This is a picture kind of from near my house down toward the pond. The interface between two defined areas, also known as the media, creates more complexity and diversity at that edge. So for example, crenellation simply means when you're taking like a smooth line, crenellating it means creating all these folds and bends, making it more convoluted. So pond that has a wavy edge could have the same area, but could have twice the amount of surface area around that edge. Because it's not just a straight line. You're creating so many more little nooks and crannies for things to be, for habitat, for plants to grow. And also the edge between ecosystems. So for example, where I live is where the mountain and the wetlands come together. And so we have species, and in many places there are species that only live at those edges. So by observing nature and understanding the edge effects in nature, you can actually increase edge effects in the things that you're doing by increasing the places where different types of media can interface. Oh, that's my house, and there's Tess on top of the house, partner Tess. I think she was cleaning the roof. But there you can see that play structure with the kiwi growing on it and the slide at the right. And it's actually that little house right there. I know Dawn knows what this plant is. It's one of our most nutritious native wild plants. It's also a dynamic accumulator. And I make pesto with it, dry it, then reconstitute in soups. People make teas with it. People do all kinds of things with it. Incredibly useful plant. You can make rope from the stalks. That's very, very strong. That was my winter's project one year. Was instead of knitting, I was making nettle cordage, and I wanted to make a long, like a real rope, and it just takes time, but wonderful, useful plant. Knowing your local ecology is so helpful. Hey, there's waterleaf again. Thank you, Dawn, for the Latin in the chat earlier, I noticed. Number 11, principle number 11, attitudinal principle. So the attitudes that you bring are so crucial to how you interact with nature and how you interact with your direct environment. So I love this expression, thoughtful and protracted observation instead of thoughtless and protracted action. So by observing and slowing down, I get to go faster, actually. versus creating a type 1 error because I didn't take my time to observe and I build my house in the floodplain, for example. Or I build a house in the Pacific Northwest with no south-facing windows. I saw that once. I couldn't believe it. A house in my area with no south-facing windows means it's going to be very dark and cold. That's easier to fix than building your house in the floodplain. Turning the problem into the solution and disadvantages into advantages. How do you do that? Permaculture is information and imagination intensive. I mentioned that earlier. The main limitations are going to be your knowledge and your creativity, your imagination. There it is at the bottom, primarily limited by our knowledge and our imagination. Here's an example of coppicing. So what looks like a stump is not a stump because it's resprouting, it's still alive. In coppicing, they call it a stool, not a stump. This was, according to Ben Law, who wrote a book called The Woodland Way, which is one of my favorite permaculture books. According to Ben Law, coppicing was the primary land use in Great Britain before the Industrial Revolution. And because I keep my house with firewood, this allows us to have a renewable firewood generation. So when one of these stems grows to firewood size, which doesn't have to be very big, we can harvest it and it'll just keep resprouting and resprouting and resprouting. So we have a few different examples of coppicing. There were mistakes that I made and ended up pruning too hard, too early, or things like that. So there are some tips and techniques to get this to work. It works with certain species at a certain time of year when you cut them. Here in the Pacific Northwest, you want to cut the tree, you want to cut this at an angle so the water can run off instead of pooling, which will create more rot. Things like that, little tips and tricks. And here's a different example. I'm sorry I don't have a higher resolution image for this, but here's a different example of the principles as articulated by David Holmgren. Observe and interact, store energy, obtain and yield, apply self-regulation and accept feedback from nature, use and value renewable resources and services, produce no waste, design from patterns to details, integrate rather than segregate, use small and slow solutions, use and value diversity, use edges and value the marginal, creatively use and respond to change. I wanted to share this because there are many ways to articulate these principles. And you can see that some of these overlap exactly with some of the things that we were talking about. And I happen to like this articulation a lot too. Food as medicine. Hey, I recognize this place. That's the volcano called Mount Baker, which I happen to live in the foothills of Lake Whatcom, and that is Bellingham, Washington, the city of Bellingham. Where I live is actually not in this picture. It's a little bit off to the left in the foothills of Mount Baker. Just a meme I pulled from the internet. Happy to find out who created it. I'll give you a moment with it. What a microbe thinks I do. I think that's hilarious. Feeding our microbe friends and allies. Now, where it says what I really do, this guy just looks like he dug a trench, right? And actually that's a swale. And in permaculture, swales are not ditches. A ditch is usually created to move water, whereas a swale is a ditch with a mound dug on contour, meaning that it's not meant to move the water, it's meant to allow the water to seep in. one of my favorite videos, if you can find it, and I lent somebody the DVD and they never returned it, and then claimed that I hadn't lent it to them, they forgot or lost it or something. But one of my favorite permaculture videos is called The Global Gardener. And they go through, it has 4 parts, and they go through different types of areas like temperate climates and tropical climates and dry lands. Anyway, and the way that it's beautifully illustrated in that video, how swales, by allowing the water to infiltrate rather than just run off, how they can really benefit aquifers and the local ecology, particularly in dryland areas as well. Nothing in the nature lives for itself. Rivers don't drink their own water. Trees don't eat their own fruit. The sun doesn't shine for itself. A flower's fragrance is not for itself. Living for each other is the rule of nature. I'd like to clarify something here with regard to environmental philosophy. Philosopher Ken Wilber helped clarify this for me because I studied so much environmental philosophy and environmental ethics, and I found most of the writers were so confused. And when I got to Wilber's holarchic ecological ethics, it made so much sense to me. So it turns out that nature have 3 types of value. One we'll call ground value or spiritual value. The other we can call depth value or intrinsic value. And the third is called relational value or instrumental value. And we get in trouble whenever we confuse these or like one with the other, or when we make any of them wrong. So for example, ground value, spiritual value, states that nothing is closer or farther from spirit. Nothing is more or less sacred than anything else. Everything is part of spiritual reality that we live in. That would be ground value or spiritual value. Intrinsic value or depth value acknowledges that different beings have different, you can call them levels of depth. So for example, if you're only looking at ground value, from an ethical perspective, it doesn't give you much guidance as to whether to save a great ape or an ant, because they're both equally spiritual. They're both equally closer to God, if you will, if you want to use that word. The universe, life, the infinite, the great mystery. So depth value acknowledges that it took a lot more of evolution's time to create the complex nervous system that you see in a great ape compared to, for example, an ant. So the depth value or the ground value of a great ape is greater than that of an ant. The third one is what this slide refers to, the relational value or instrumental value. So the first problem is environmental philosophers or environmental ethicists, or the rest of us, everyday people trying to think about how we interact with nature. We confuse the first two. We mistake intrinsic value for ground value, and then everything becomes the same and the world becomes flat. Not very useful. And the other thing that sometimes we do is we make instrumental value bad. We make relational value bad because, oh, then you're just using something, or it's like a negative, oppressive type of thing. But the truth is that everything in nature contributes to other things in nature, and things use other things in nature. And so living for each other is the rule of nature. So this is balancing autonomy and interdependence. It's balancing agency and communion. It's balancing that depth value, where we're seeing something as a whole unto itself, and balancing that with the instrumental or relational value, where we're seeing everything as a larger whole. I wanted to make that point here. One day, all of humankind will understand there are a countless number of animals waiting to communicate with us, waiting to be our friends, waiting for our love. I recently posted a video on Facebook of a man rescuing a hawk that had been tangled in fishing line. And you can see so many examples, if you look for them, of people helping out whales that have been caught in fishing nets and things like that. And there does seem to be something akin to gratitude, something there, especially with something like a whale, a mammal with a big brain. And yeah, rather than seeing nature as the enemy, rather than being afraid of nature, rather than feeling like we need to control and subjugate nature, how do we connect? And the way that we treat nature and the way that we treat each other are reflected. There's a whole field. I've studied many different types of feminism. I noticed they don't all agree on some very important points. And when you look at ecofeminism, for example, there are a lot of correlates of the way that a patriarchal based worldview that subjugates women parallels the way humans subjugate nature. And the other day in a meditation, I had this image of people working to help the natural world, protect the natural world, but from a depleted place. And I realized, gosh, how I treat myself is how I treat the earth. So can I accept deep nourishment for myself as part of a larger natural order? So Thich Nhat Hanh says we need a revolution. It starts with falling in love with the earth. Bruce Lipton said, a miraculous healing awaits this planet once we accept our new responsibility to collectively tend to the garden rather than fight over the turf. And that's it, isn't it? Nature's so beautiful. The earth is so beautiful. And when you look around us, first of all, I think living on planet Earth is one of the greatest, one of the most wonderful ways to travel through space. We are in deep space. And if you look around our planet, we're surrounded by a desert. The planet that astronomers think might be the most similar to Earth would take us 50,000 years to get to with our current technology. There is no planet B. Yes, it does. There is one and only one solution, and we have almost no time to try it. We must turn all our resources to repairing the natural world and train all our young people to help. They want to. We need to give them this last chance to create forests, soils, clean waters, clean energies, secure communities, stable regions, and to know how to do it from hands-on experience. Thank you, Bill Mollison. I just found this recently. I don't know who created it. I would be happy to give them credit. Mars sucks. This is from the Earth. Mars sucks. Its weather sucks. Its distance sucks. Its atmosphere sucks. The little water it has sucks. It has sucked for billions of years and will suck for billions more. You know what doesn't suck? Me, Earth. I have life. I have vast oceans and lush forests. I have rivers to swim, air to breathe. But the way I'm being treated, that part sucks. You use me and pollute me. You overheat me. You use every resource I have and return very little back from where it came. And then you dream of Mars, a hellhole, a barren, desolate wasteland you can't set foot on fast enough. Why not use some of that creative energy and billions on saving me? You know, the planet that's giving you what you need to live right now. Mars can wait. I can't. Earth. Buckminster Fuller, you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. This reminds me that in Kalapa, we have a party at winter solstice, and we call it Kalapa Experience Weekend. And last year, the theme was calling in a new earth. This year, our theme is a better party for a new culture. And we created that inspired by the expression, if you want to change the culture, learn to throw a better party. So we created this event, and the dates are December 16 through 19. So you can write that down now, December 16 through 19. Last year we had live music, we had authentic relating games, we had a grief ritual, we had a DJ dance party, we had all kinds of workshops and presentations. So save the date, December 16 through 19. There is a free level. You can donate, that really helps too. But we like to make our things radically accessible. And this event is at the confluence of ceremony, conference, retreat, and celebration. And we have a whole team helping to put that on, including Dawn from Bellingham is part of our team putting on this year's Kalapa Experience Weekend, Winter Solstice. Look at the stars. I believe that is a redwood tree in California. So if you're interested, if you're in my local area, because I know a few people signed up for my local area, I want to promote local permaculture teachers. So Brian Kirkvliet, inspirationfarm.com, and they have currently and coming up. And also, if you're interested in a permaculture design course in Hawaii in the fall of 2021, my friend Bruce Horowitz of ripelandscapes.com, he said you can write to him at that email to get on their mailing list or learn more about it. There is a tab on that website also about it. So if you're local to my area, here are some resources. And I think this is a garden at Findhorn Eco Village in Scotland, but I'm not positive, and I'd be happy to give someone credit for this photo, which is so lovely. Instead of the end, this is the beginning. So I love it that there's so few people on the call, given that like 95 people signed up. So most people will be getting the recording. I would love to get your feedback, your questions, anything at all. Just open your microphone if you want to say anything. We can also do it in Spanish. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Karimar, please.
Yeah, I'm really sad that I couldn't be through the whole presentation because my internet kept kicking me out. But the time I was able to listen, it was really inspiring. And I was most of the time with a smile in my face. Yeah, and at the same time, I have two things about the word nature. It's interesting. I've been learning a little bit about buen vivir and the way indigenous communities sees is that we are nature, and that we have this idea that nature is one thing and we are humans and this is nature and this is us. but the reality is that we are nature, and we are disconnected from our, from nature. We have been disconnected, and we have been sold this idea that we are, like, nature is one thing.
Yeah.
So for one part, it reminded me that.
Yeah. Yes.
And the questions of the test that you did were, like, really interested. I mean, I thought, oh well, there are a lot of answers that I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
And the last thing is that it felt, and it reminded me that it's a little bit overwhelming, because I feel it's a lot to
Mm-hmm.
learn. I started a social project in Venezuela 2 years ago. We try to help people to grow food. We teach them a little bit because we don't have the knowledge. And I mean, Mickey Cashton inspired me a lot. She's like, in one book of Mickey Cashton, she said, you know, if you want to change and do something, do it even if you don't have the knowledge. Just start right now.
Yeah.
And sometimes when I'm reminded that I don't have a lot of knowledge, I'm like, okay, I just want to do something, and I try.
Yeah.
So we are here trying to do a social project, and we have been trying to learn a lot of agroecological practices, a little bit of permaculture.
Yeah.
And I have realized how difficult it is. Like, we have helped some families, we have done a composting zone, a community garden, but it's so much knowledge. And right now I'm learning nonviolent communication, and it's, for me, it's like, wow, it's just too much to learn, and it's a little bit overwhelming.
Yeah.
Sometimes I don't feel capable of learning, and especially permaculture, because permaculture is not just gardening.
Mm-hmm.
It's so much. It's just everything.
Yeah.
Bioconstruction, it's just too much. And it's overwhelming sometimes. And especially wanting to learn also how to communicate non-violent with myself, and trying to. So it's just, a little bit overwhelming.
Yeah.
So that's what I have to say. And I hope in the future I will be able to learn more, and and see how can I live in a way that, because also there is a thing of money, and I need to work. It's not only learning and learning. I need work, and it's not only doing a social project. I also need to work for myself.
Yes.
So
And
I'm sorry I poured all this here.
no, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. I mean, I'm hearing that there are so many things that interest you and that you want to learn, and that you see a necessity to learn, and also you want to help others, but you sense that you don't have all the knowledge and the experience that you would like to contribute as much as you want, and it feels overwhelming, and trying to learn nonviolent communication and communicate nonviolently with yourself. And then and then it sounds like you've done some really wonderful projects, and then at the same time you need to work, and you need to have a livelihood for yourself, and it feels very overwhelming. And Karimar, I want to acknowledge also that, you're calling in from Venezuela, and Venezuela has been in a terrible crisis for years. And people outside of Venezuela don't realize how absolutely almost impossible the living situation is. So I just want to acknowledge that you're not only are things overwhelming enough, but you live in this context where you are that makes it extra difficult. So I just want to acknowledge that. I understand that's I imagine that's a part of it as well. So, I think I'd like to offer that, the times when it's easy for me to get overwhelmed is when I want to do everything at once. I want everything to get done now. That's the easiest way for me to get overwhelmed. And I'll share with you an expression that has helped me a lot in certain moments in my life, which is start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. Start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. I would add to that, find the others. And I think you've already started to do that. Because we need each other, and we need to do this in community. Thank you so much, Karimar. And I appreciate your intentions and your efforts more than you know.
Thank you, and thanks for doing this, because it's really hard sometimes to find workshops and stuff like that. Well, especially for me because of my internet. But thanks for offering this session, and yeah, I'll be hearing it. I hope I'll be hearing more from you, because next week I think I start a workshop with you also, if my internet.
Woohoo! Yay! And one of the people from that team is here. We're doing a workshop on NVC and social change. It's actually 9 sessions. Florencia is one of our organizers, and who is also an NVC teacher in Mexico. And so yeah, we'll be seeing more of each other, I'm guessing. Thank you, Karimar. Yeah, I'm looking forward very much to that 9-session course in Spanish on NVC and social change. Any other feedback or questions? Yeah, just unmute your microphone and jump in if you want.
Well, for me, it was really exciting to hear your passion about permaculture.
Uh-oh. I think your internet froze. Florencia, let's wait till your internet comes back, and then can you start over? All I heard is you appreciated my passion about permaculture.
Yes. Maybe better here? You hear me better?
Good. Yeah, go ahead.
That, yeah, it's really inspiring what you just shared, and it really motivated me to live again in a permaculture farm or with people who are in the similar or have the same interest about living in a sustainable way, because now, yeah, I live by myself with people that are interested in permaculture, but the lack of this community, it really, I don't know, it really gets me. I would really wish to live in a community and be part of a group, you know, that we're helping each other. And yeah, you just really inspired me. And yeah, I'm looking forward to do another PDC. I don't know if in Hawaii though, it looks far away from me. Yeah, but thanks for sharing this. I think it's really a valuable tool to everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Florencia. Yeah, and you know, we start to see how all the different areas of Kalapa reinforce each other, because living on the land by yourself is not that much fun, and it's so much work. And so when people learn permaculture, then they're like, oh, I want to have a place where I can plant fruit trees, or connect with other people so we can be in a place where we can plant fruit trees. So that brings us to the southeast of Kalapa around visioning and manifesting. How do we find a community, or how do we find land, or how do we find that? And then once you're living with other people, it's like the west of Kalapa, how do you build community and sustain community? And once you're living with other people, the east of Kalapa, nonviolent communication, essential. I can't imagine living in community or even being in a relationship without something like nonviolent communication. The tools and the skills are so essential. So yeah, all the different areas in the Kalapa curriculum reinforce each other and synergize. So yeah, I look forward to witnessing your journey. Go ahead.
I would like to ask you, how's the economy within your community? How does it work? I don't know if it's related to this subject though.
It's a long and complicated. How does the economy work? It's kind of complex, but every community is different. If you look at ic.org, that's the Fellowship for Intentional Communities, and they publish a directory. The last version I saw had over 600 communities all over the world. I think half of them were in the United States, but really all over the world. And this is one of the areas that, how do you do like your biosystems, meaning like, are you doing solar? Are you doing, are you using biodegradable soaps, those kinds of things? And then another piece is the built environment. How are we doing the built environment? Is it natural building, or like how things are placed? And then there are two others, which is, how does the community handle power and decision making? And then the other element is your question, the community economics. How does the community handle the economics? And the last two are the hardest: power and decision making, and the economics. And they're the pieces that most people ignore or avoid, because the built environment and biosystems are almost more like technical fixes. These are things that people can figure out fairly easily. And so I've known communities where they do asset sharing. When you join the community, everything you own becomes part of the community. And I know communities that do income sharing too. And there are communities that have started their own businesses. Our community is still evolving, so there isn't a set answer, but so we do so we in terms of power and decision making, which connects with the economics, we have two different levels, which is like, on one level, we live in a benign dictatorship because when it comes down to it, I own this property. And so I'm the one who, if something happens on the land and somebody gets in trouble with the law, that's me. I'm also more liable and responsible. But that's one level. But really what we try to do is everything with consent and by consensus. So we have our community meetings and we make the decisions by consensus. I've been an NVC trainer for a long time. I'm not interested in placing demands or imposing my views. But at the end of the day, I'm the one who pays the taxes. I pay the land taxes. So the economics are a little bit, everybody's on their own. People figure out their own livelihood. People figure out their own. So, for example, I have two people here who don't pay any rent. They live here, but it's one of them is Cody, actually, who runs the nature school. And one of the gifts of having this person here is that his meditation and his therapy is like working on the trails and working out on the land and in nature and watering the fruit trees. Like, so what I said to Cody many years ago is, you do your art and you get to live here. And you don't need to pay any rent. And your school can be here, and your school doesn't need to pay any rent. Because having your school here contributes to my life purpose. And also, but I would like my children to attend the school for free. And so my children were able to go to the nature school when they were little. If it's a summer camp or something like that, then we pay. But just during the school year, if my kids want to go, we don't have to pay. So we're just doing a straight up trade, but there's no specific projects, no specific timelines or deadlines. Like, I don't want to manage somebody, and I love for him to have full autonomy of what he does, when he does it. And we've lived together 20 years, so I really trust him. And if something comes up, we'll work it out. So that's part of the economics, right? I have somebody here who doesn't pay any rent, but contributes some for like electrical bills and other things. And then there's another person here who actually invested upfront for us to be able to keep the land in exchange for, we just called it that he paid like 10 years of rent upfront. So that's part of the economics. But when it comes down to it, you know, a presentation like this, I did it for free. So that doesn't help me pay my electrical bill or my land taxes, but I have clients, right? I have individuals and organizations that I work with that is how I'm able to pay the land taxes and pay the electrical bill and things like that. So so it's a little bit anarchical. It's a little bit of anarchy, but it's not chaos, right? It's not chaotic anarchy. It's living in the present, connecting with what's alive. Everybody here shares permaculture and NVC. So if there's an issue, we trust each other's intentions and skills to work it out. But yeah, the economics are basically mostly on my shoulders. And that's okay, because it's a very small community right now. And I'll add to the answer too, though, because in 2005, we hosted an eco-village design course, somebody else's program, on how to design eco-villages. And we had 40 people on the land for about a week, divided into different design teams working with maps of the land. And one of the lessons was we could not create something at the scale of eco-village on this property, but we could at the neighborhood scale. So that's when we started to invite people to come and help us buy up the neighborhood. And once we have more people arriving and we're starting to coordinate and collaborate with other people, the economics are going to shift. And I don't know how. Now, everything I just said, I'm really open to a different model. I'm really open to doing it a different way. I'd love to find something that really feels equitable to everybody and where everybody feels like they're thriving. But right now, that's our setup.
Okay, thanks for sharing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, benign dictatorship. that's our power and decision making. No, we do everything with consent by consensus. But yeah, when the chips are down, it falls on me.
That sounds really good. And how many people are you right now?
We have five full-time adults and 5 part-time children, because
Okay.
the children spend part-time with their other parent who doesn't live here. So for example, Martin, you know this, that I have a book I want to write titled How We Got Divorced and Kept Our Family Together, because my ex and I went through an NVC separation and divorce, and she lives next door. She lives on the property next door with the kids. So that's a 10-minute walk or 1 minute by car or bicycle. And but she wants to move, and when she moves, the owner of that property wants to sell, and so I want somebody to move in to help us build the eco village. Yeah. So
see, if I wasn't in Germany, that would be wonderful.
that sounds like an excuse.
Yeah.
People move countries. I'm playing. Well, and you could do something similar in Germany. I don't see why not.
Sounds like a project.
Well, yeah, life is short. I say, you know, one of the 3 most valuable pieces of advice I've ever gotten, one of them came from one of the Bullock brothers, where I did my permaculture design course. And his advice was, dream big and go for it. That's always stuck with me. Pretty soon I'm going to be plant food anyway, right? I mean, we all came in with a 2-way ticket, so I really want everyone to go for it as much as they can.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions or feedback from anyone? Okay, well, we conclude a little more than a half hour early. I'm glad to give you some of your time back to use in whatever way you wish. And before we close, I am curious whether there are any final comments, feedback, or questions. Well, I appreciate you being here. It contributes to my life purpose. And please feel free to reach out. Bye for now.
It's wonderful to see you again. Hey.
You too. You too. Yeah. Take care.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Ciao.
Thank you.